So, as all of you know, electronic cigarettes don't just replace nicotine, and that's what I'm playing around with here in the title. They have the potential to actually displace the behavioral act of smoking itself, right? And that also includes, not just nicotine, includes the sensory motor, the tangible aspects of smoking, the throat hit, et cetera. The challenge we have is that it's hard to measure these phenomena, these highly complex dynamic phenomenon. And I'm concerned that if we don't do a better job measuring them, we're not going to be able to conduct the kind of programmatic, systematic research we need to do to understand the kind of person-level and device-specific characteristics that drive these processes over time. So I'm going to start with a slide here that's a fancy-looking slide that I'm using to just make a fairly basic point. This comes from a paper published by Caroline Cobb and colleagues in tobacco regulatory science. Essentially what I want to say is that the basic point is that cross-sectional survey data of the kind we rely very heavily on to understand what's happening with patterns of use are quite limited when it comes to trying to understand more dynamic phenomenon. And here, let me see if this works. Yeah, but essentially what we're doing with cross-sectional survey data is we're classifying people, right? And these four general bins here, and the fifth here in the middle, this dual-use category, are the bins that we push people into, right? So you're either a non-user, you're a former user, you can use one e-cigarettes, you can use the other cigarettes, or you can sort of fall somewhere in the middle. And to me, this conception of dual use here, which is really the focus of my talk today, this is essentially a catch-all. Right? We're just throwing everybody in there, although we know that dual use is a highly complex phenomenon. We can do better than that, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. We can actually measure dual use fairly precisely, and what I want to do, and this will fit the data that I'm going to be presenting in a minute, is I want to move away from longitudinal patterns where we're classifying people and forcing them to be in one state or another over time, and instead think about our favorite statistic from the world of tobacco control, which is cigarettes per day, which is what I've got here as CPD, and then I've got EC just for electronic cigarettes. And this is, again, this is just conceptual here. We've got day one, and we've got, thanks, Ricardo. We've got day one, and we've got a cross-sectional singular observation, which is that a person has used some amount of combusted product and some amount of an electronic product. And the question that I think is interesting to ask is, based on this data, can we say anything definitive about whether harm has been reduced in this case? My position would be that no, we don't have enough information here. It's impossible to tell what's going on. So what we can do is enhance the picture, collect more data, trying to understand what's going on. Now, with information about what this person has been doing, let's say this is a regular combusted cigarette smoker, previous to this point. And now that we know that they've been smoking combusted cigarettes about that much, has there been any reduction in harm? Maybe not. The story continues, though. And what I'm going to be talking about today is an approach to quantifying combusted cigarette displacement via electronic cigarettes in a really precise way. And the way we do this is we characterize it in units of displaced combusted cigarette smoking. So what I've done is this, actually I have a legend on a later slide, but this green area is the amount of combusted smoking that's been replaced. This up here is surplus under this model. Sorry, I wonder if I can, yeah. Okay, so, and an interesting side note here, for people who are concerned about the issue that it's difficult to compare measures, traditional measures of combusted cigarette smoking to measures of electronic use events. Under this framework, because we're couching in terms of reduced combusted smoking, we're not terribly concerned about the surplus, right? We're just quantifying the amount displaced. So, whether you want to talk about puffs or use episodes, it's not statistically too much of a problem for us under this framework. So just for fun, let's do another one. And again, a cross-sectional observation, and now some more prior information about what's been going on prior to this. Have we seen any reduction in harm? Well, perhaps. Now, there's any number of profiles that could happen with this sort of approach, and what we're essentially doing is categorizing, we're classifying. And let me give a summary then of what's going on. And I use this term Bayesian blocks because this is a Bayesian approach to looking at things. We're taking prior information to ask what did we expect in the first place in terms of both combusted cigarette smoking and electronic smoking. And on the basis of what we expected in the first place, how can we draw inferences about what's displaced and what is in addition? And so the way I'm trying to do this, and I'm calling this the prior probability of combusted cigarette smoking. I'm sorry that's not more clear, but essentially we can use any number of pieces of information to understand what a person's pattern is, and then on the basis of that, we can adjust and understand the role of electronic cigarette smoking in their pattern. And these arrows here are representing in an overly simplistic way, but the idea that we're using the premise of what we should have expected to make these evaluations. So we have, my group at NYU mHealth, we provide infrastructure for collecting ecological momentary assessment data, and we've used this to collect data as part of 2 randomized controlled trials now. This is the first one I'm not going to talk about. This was in collaboration with Jenny Pearson and her group at the Truth Initiative in DC. We are applying the methods I'm presenting here today to this trial. That's not ready for prime time yet. The trial that I'm going to talk about today stems from a project that was published in NTR a little while back in collaboration with Donna Shelley and her colleagues at the med school at NYU. And this was the original report coming out of that. This is a 3-week randomized controlled trial. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. These are younger people. These are people who essentially were not completely naive to electronic cigarettes, but not regular users, and who were recruited explicitly for the purpose of attempting to reduce the harm that they're experiencing related to combusted cigarettes by replacing up to half of their cigarettes with electronic cigarettes. And there's a discussion that could be had about this 50% reduction criterion. Part of it, frankly, stems back from some of the regulatory uncertainty of what we're even allowed to do, and claims that we're allowed to make about e-cigarettes as a cessation intervention. And so this was a way to get around that a little bit. So we had about 100 people randomized to receive either Enjoy devices that had nicotine or did not. And the primary outcome was the 3-week endpoint, but like I said, we collected ecological momentary assessment data, basically just having people check in repeatedly through each day of the trial and talk to us about how much they were smoking combusted and electronic products. And so we were able to get a fairly precise record of what was going on across the 3-week period. And we're using the venerable, relatively low efficiency Enjoy devices for this, and that was also the case in the Pearson trial that we ran in DC. Again, so this is just a reminder, it's probably too much now, but again, I'm not presenting the math, but this is a fair characterization of the algorithm we're using to understand the subject's experience in the trial. So let me show you what that actually looks like. Here we switch from Bayesian blocks like I was using to a circular conception of what people are actually doing. Each one of these is a profile for an actual participant in the trial. And there's a lot going on here, but essentially what I'm trying to show is that the distinction between folks who are reducing their combusted use without the help of the electronic alternative, and that's represented by red circles in some of these profiles. You can see some people reducing, and importantly, there's a black dotted line, which is the baseline amount that they were smoking combusted cigarettes. Here's a person reducing by about half. Here's a person on their own personal journey. A person displacing effectively, represented by the green circles, meaning that they're displacing their combusted use with electronic cigarettes, but then, for whatever reason, starting to struggle back. And then some other displacement patterns down here. That's just to give a feel for the raw data that we're talking about. Now, how do we make sense of this mess? Well, there's actually really well-established methods for doing so. They generally fall into the world of cluster analysis or hierarchical cluster analysis. can also be implemented in something called latent class analyses. Essentially, we're letting the data help us understand clusters of individuals who are following similar patterns. And these are the raw data that represent what I'm talking about. And what our data showed us, that there were 3 clusters of subjects that represented what was happening in this particular trial. And you can see them here. You can sort of call them what you want, but you've got on the bottom here, now these are, let me be clear, these are patterns of Cpd reduction. So we can characterize both the absolute amount that people are smoking combusted cigarettes, that's one thing, and then the other thing we can look at is displacement. And I'm going to show you both of those. These are data for combusted cigarettes. You see daily combusted reduction amount. And you can look at these different classifications. With the rapid reducers, this is about 33 people, 41% of the sample. These are small numbers. This is preliminary, and we would want larger sample sizes. So just to be clear on that. You've got rapid reducers, you've got gradual reducers, and then you've got maintainers of about 50% reduction. Okay, and remember, that was their goal coming into that's what they were recruited to do. And again, this is just to demonstrate how some of these patterns look with raw data. And we did have, I just want to mention, I'm not presenting today on the drug control, placebo control aspects of this study. You can see here for when we stratify by drug assignment, nicotine, active nicotine or placebo, and it's borne out in the statistical models, that there weren't many differences in terms of absolute combusted reduction, whether or not the person actually received nicotine in the electronic cigarette. It's a separate story, but I think a very interesting one about the really powerful role of the sensory motor aspects of the devices, not just the drug. It's another story, though. So now if we look at patterns of displacement using a similar approach, you can see what, for the most part, are your dual users. These are people who, over the 3-week study, are consistently using electronic cigarettes to reduce the amount that they're smoking combusted cigarettes. You've got people who follow that pattern over most of the first week and then reduce. And then you've got people who, I don't know what to call them. Are they non-responders? Did they try the electronic cigarettes and not like them? Maybe they were so effective that they didn't need them anymore. It's important to understand that when we talk about displacement, it implies, it's inherent to the idea of displacement that there has to be something to displace, right? That's what I was trying to get at in the first series of graphics. What that means when we look at these data, or these just patterns right here, is that we don't know the whole story. We don't know exactly what's going on. So a person could be reducing, for instance, with these Kickstarters, we call them, they could be reducing their level of displacement for more than one reason. They could be, it could be that they are also effectively reducing the amount of their combusted use. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that they are choosing not to use the electronic device and either continuing to smoke combusted cigarettes or who knows what, right? So, so that's what actually we wanted to look at here, and one of the things that I wanted to, one of the big take-home things, preliminary findings that I wanted to present as part of this talk, just because it's on the slide, and I don't want to fall off the stage. Because it's on the slide, you can see again the sort of patterns that I'm talking about here. In this case, with the green circles, we're talking about the sort of displacement patterns that are sort of reflected in these overall cluster groups. Ricardo, how am I doing on time? Do you know?
You have 2 minutes.
Oh, wow, okay. Okay, so we, again, I'm not presenting the statistical models. They do exist, and the patterns that I'm presenting today, by the way, are statistically significant, in case anybody's wondering. But I didn't want to go there, but instead, let's do something else. Let's ask and stratify across these different displacement cluster groups, okay? And let's ask for each one of these groups what was going on in terms of their combusted use. I was just saying we can't know just by looking at the graphics. And so we can stratify. And here On the left, you've got the dual-use displacement cluster. Okay, so these are the folks that are consistently displacing cigarettes across the whole, with electronic cigarettes across the whole trial. And I don't know how well people can see this, but essentially here's your 50% reduction line, and they're doing pretty well, actually. You've got the maintain cluster. These are people who are maintaining that 50% reduction level that they were asked to do. And these are people who are displacing. They're using both. You've got gradual reducers, and you've got the rapid reducer group. Okay, now let's look at folks who are not using electronic cigarettes, or they're rapidly just decided not to do so as part of the trial, as I was showing you on the previous slide. And what's interesting is, now these numbers are small. They get a little, the variation gets a little squirrely. But overall, look at this. They're not doing as well. The dual, and again, this is a statistically significant finding in the models that we ran on this. The people who are consistently dual using are having a better time maintaining the 50% reduction level. You can just eyeball this. And interestingly, in the gradual reduce group, look at what's happening in the gradual reduce group among the folks who aren't using electronic cigarettes. They're also struggling. Now, the rapid reducers look pretty similar, and maybe those people were going to be fine either way from the beginning. So this is just in a way of summary. As you can tell, I usually try to avoid having too many words and reading to people, but I'd say in summary, preliminary findings from this trial indicate that smokers who continued to dual use electronic cigarettes over the course of the study, I guess I just said that, achieved a better Cpd reduction rate than those who gradually extinguished their EC use or didn't use ECs consistently at all. You know, one of my big picture goals here was to demonstrate this analytic approach and just make this more general point that there are different kinds of data out there, and one way to, I think, actually reduce some of the vitriol and the debate right now is to use data that's less ambiguous. And when we're going to talk about dual use and we're going to have arguments about whether dual use is good or bad, why don't we base those claims on data and actually try to measure the phenomenon that we think are important here, again, with real-world implications for the kinds of individual difference factors and device design factors, et cetera, that could all be plugged into this sort of approach and used to understand what tips people toward complete switching versus sustaining or maintaining a use that might be more conservative, concerning. So that's it. Thanks, everyone.